Welcome to another episode of the Science Citizens Podcast. My name is Sandra de Vries and this is the podcast for the citizen science enthusiast and critic. With my company Pulse Aqua, I advise and assist in the development of citizen science projects for environmental issues. In this podcast, I share with you my experiences and discuss the more philosophical, ethical and controversial sides of citizen science, while demonstrating its potential use in environmental science as well as the available tools. In this episode, I would like to talk more about how we can use citizen science to actually get justice, environmental justice. That is why I invited Anne Berti Suman to join me during this episode. Dr. Anne Berti Suman is a postdoctoral researcher at the Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society. Anna is performing research on the potential of citizen sensing for environmental litigation and mediation. In her PhD project, she investigated how citizen sensing influences the governance of environmental health risk and how the practice can be integrated with institutional models of risk governance.
We are realizing a fumet, comics-based story. Yeah. So basically, our findings are going into comics that tells the story of monitoring of oil contamination in a land that is inspired by Basilicata, so southern Italy, but doesn't name it. So we don't run any political troubles. But really, the use of comics, it's being there are so many schools that are asking for it, and peers and the farmers we are working with that are very interested. So it's quite creative, this expression of a new way of communicating your findings. So I would say I'm dedicating a lot of time to that. And I'm really working with, on the ground people. So for example, fishermen and fisherwomen, peasants and breeders. So in a sense, I feel more connected to the research subjects.
Yeah, exactly. Not anymore just in theory, but you're really putting it in practice now. And
and for a longer time, because I guess for the PhD was short, field visit, and now it's something I can do more often. And even with Corona, as some of them are in Basilicata, so southern Italy, I could get there, so it's a bit more accessible. Yeah. And apart from that, I'm living now in northern Italy on the Lake Maggiore. I'm really happy here. I adopted 2 dogs, so I feel
so jealous. So you use this, of course, in the Sensing for Justice project.
I think the Sensing for Justice projects indeed start from this perceptional aspect. So the fact that people may perceive environmental issues, which are perceived as environmental injustice, really on their skin, and these can trigger, disruptive reaction, which can be people taking this, perception and trying to translate them into evidence and eventually getting to the court stage. And I think with the Sensing for Justice, I'm kind of going back to my own roots, as I am trained as an environmental lawyer. So I was always, when I was researching on citizen science and sensing, I was also always thinking, I think there's something beyond just steering policymakers. Maybe they could even go to courts when policymakers don't listen to them. And we saw, for example, in the Netherlands with the Urgenda, that sometimes citizens can bypass the governments by going through the court stage. So the court is also becoming a big fora for voicing justice. And so I thought, why don't we look at the judicial uptake of citizen-generated data and that can become environmental evidence? And so the Sensing for Justice project really looks at which conditions apply to citizen-generated data when people want to use this as evidence in environmental litigation. Yeah. So it's really looking into the court arena and seeing which condition do these courts apply. And we are starting from really real cases where citizen evidence were used in environmental litigation. Yeah. And one of these is this massive Formosa ruling in 2019. And we're really in contact with the fisherwomen that won the case. And it's really about plastic contamination gathering by laymen, fisherwomen, so lay women actually. And they brought this evidence to the courts, and the court could say nothing but finding Formosa, the company, this petrochemical company, guilty, because the evidence was so stunning that was clear the violation of the permit by this chemical company. Now, of course, there are many other instances where it's way more, let's say, troublesome and more difficult to get the court persuaded. But this was really a stunning case and inspired our, let's say, project design.
Yeah, I think it's a very, an impressive story, actually. And an example for many, many different people, I would say. If you now go to this project and with Sensing for Justice, how do you think this will be as an uptake in the EU? Are you focusing on countries specifically, or are you focusing on EU legislation? And what potential does it have?
That's a great question, especially because, we are looking for the conditions that court apply to this kind of evidence. Yeah. And in a sense, this is really procedural law, so it's really country specific. So while we were looking at this US case, Texas actually, we understood that we cannot make, let's say, prescriptions or predictions that could apply to other courts, let's say, around the world. What we could see is to identify patterns. So, for example, common law and civil law countries do have some shared patterns. What are the conditions? And, for example, some preconditions, like the use of protocols by the citizen in collecting this data, is something that every kind of court would assess. However, there are some standards for evidence. For example, the Dober standard in the US, the Dober standard for admissibility of testimony, that it's really country specific. So we cannot expect, for example, an Italian court or a Dutch court to apply it. So what we should do is then to select some kind of key jurisdiction and go into that. Okay. So, for example, we are looking at now Italian jurisdictions as one of the case studies based in Italy. And we are also looking at a case that is Chilean and Sweden. So that's quite interesting because it's both sides, like South America and Northern Europe. and in the end, I think the EU level, so EU institutions do not really rule into that. But what we are interested in is, for example, to look at the European Court of Human Rights or the European Court of Justice, whether they're ruling over some cases that could entail some type of citizen-generated evidence. When I mentioned The Hague, I also talked to the arbitration court, which is based in The Hague as well. And one of the things that we are also interested in is to assess whether citizen science and sensing could also trigger alternative dispute resolution. So as the court rulings are really long and sometimes they don't, like, justice comes just too late, we are considering whether alternative settlement can be a way to deliver justice to these people a bit more swiftly in a sense. Although we also have some concern because, like an arbitration, sometimes there are many interests involved and pressures, and the justice system has more guarantees and it becomes a precedent, whereas the arbitration system doesn't. But let's say the potential for citizen science to become a tool for mediating environmental conflicts instead of escalating to the court, we think it's also worth exploring. Also because one case in 10 goes to court and all the other are kind of addressed beyond the court.
Okay, yeah, exactly. Yeah, or before the court actually even occurs.
Yes, indeed, exactly. Yeah. most of the communities I'm helping at the moment, I'm just doing it like pro bono, because these communities really cannot pay a lawyer. So then, in a sense, the justice system is also unbalanced in that, like, companies can pay the best lawyer ever, and
no, exactly. So what I like about it is that it does have potential, and that if you are convicted enough and have the energy and the time and that perhaps you can actually do this. And what I like is that you guys are creating, I think if I understood it well, a toolbox also for interested communities, not just for policymakers and researchers, but also for the communities to use. So what would that look like? I mean, how would they be able to use that to indeed at some point perhaps go to court?
Yes. So what I think it's quite let's say the use of the term toolbox. It's a bit. It says everything and nothing.
Exactly.
But in a sense, it's let's say for us, really the idea is to extract from practical cases some advice for communities that want to litigate an environmental case based on their data. So, for example, in the Formosa case, one of the key takeaway was that the evidence was really straightforward, was like just plastic, like physically, no analysis, just really the plastic as a material evidence. Whereas when you enter into water analysis, for example, it's already way more challenging. So one practical suggestion is, if you have also this factual evidence that doesn't require any further analysis, go first with that. So in a sense, Toolbox is like a series of suggestions based on what we could witness in existing rulings. It's really quite practical, and in a sense, it's very context dependent. But if you have another case that is fighting for plastic, then they can try to put themselves in the shoes of the Formosa plaintiffs and take the same, let's say, steps to follow, to hopefully get a positive result.
Yeah. So you're trying to create guidelines in the sense.
I think more than guidelines, I would say they're more like overarching, where we kind of say we make scenarios, and in these scenarios we think these are the good, let's say at least the aspects that seem to be favorable to the decision. And then we say, okay, look, if the court changes, so you're not in the US, but in another court, you maybe also need to worry about standing, because in the US, for example, there is a particular rules on standing, or in the US, citizens could use the citizen suite authority, which is a special, let's say, direct access to court, which in Europe, for example, in Italy is not there. So in a sense, we are kind of, the best would be that then a community comes to us and we kind of assess their case and apply the lessons we got from similar cases, let's say.
Yeah, but that would be quite a lot of manual work again. And preferably you would wish to be as cheap as possible for such communities, of course. I mean, for people with money, as we just discussed, companies, policymakers, researchers, on average, they have a budget. Then you can consult them in a way. And the more it becomes communities, the more your time is also limited, isn't it? I mean, that's how it is.
Yes, in a sense, yes. What I'm thinking is that actually there are many, let's say, centers of expertise that are not being exploited so much by communities. For example, the clinic in law schools. These are students that are studying environmental law, and they are very often are very brilliant and know the last jurisprudence, case law. And for example, in the case of the US, the Harvard Law Clinic is really helping communities for free. And these students are checked by their professors, which are often environmental lawyers. So I would say that actually these law clinics in, for example, Dutch universities could be quite helpful, because they're basically free. They're the students that were fresher. And okay, it's not a litigating lawyer, but at least in terms of advice could be useful.
They are much more knowledgeable, definitely. So they know what to think about, they know where to look, they know the general law.
Yeah. And for example, they could also help us, like I'm just one, and let's say the scientific supervisor of this project, Sven Schade, is based at the JRC, and he's German. So I'm Italian, he's German. We may know more about German case law and Italian case law, but we also need to partner, for example, with a Dutch case law clinic to get insight from the last jurisprudence there.
Exactly. Or for the Indian project, somebody from India, of course. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, clear. And then, of course, you already mentioned that you have some recent findings. So perhaps, what are you going to put in these cartoons, for example? Because I suppose that you're going to show some findings in that.
So in a sense, the cartoon is inspired by what we witnessed by a field work in fall last year, so 2020, in Basilicata, where actually we were, at least I was really confronted by two facts. One was really that the citizen scientists there are really beyond, let's say, stereotypes. Even in Japan, let's say some citizen scientists were like this super geek tech from the meat. So in a sense, we're quite usual suspects. In Basilicata, the people that were running analysis was really like a breeder or a peasant. They were just doing that out of need. They were not even considering that was any type of science. They were just really struggling to understand why their animals kept dying or having kidney disease. So really doing citizen science out of need made me connected to the most genuine sense of citizen science. And second, like I felt that the level of silencing of any type of alternative data collection was so strong to really become a sort of like something that was so internal to the system. So I was shocked that we were blocked by the private police of the company and even by the public police. So the Carabinieri, which are like the public police in Italy, together with the actual police. And they were questioning why we were, for example, collecting some samples. So that the volunteers were collecting water samples and we were with them like observing there. And they took our IDs, our data of birds and so on. And I really felt this is something so intrusive. We are on public land and we are asked by the police what we are doing and registered. And actually the citizen denounced so many times the company like smells and so on, and nobody comes to take the data of the, for example, company inspectors. And so I felt that the imbalance of information was really becoming, let's say, a violation of rights to access to information and to produce information. So I felt it was even beyond South America. And I lived almost 2 years in South America. And I felt like I never felt so confronted with this silencing as in Southern Italy.
Yeah. So you really saw citizen sensing or science there really as a form of advocacy. Like this really is needed. Yeah.
But also like a form of survival. Because when you start, like these people were really diagnosed with like liver cancer and stomach cancer. And I felt like, I could take pictures to the like statements by the doctors and the statement by the authorities saying cancerogenic compounds in your water, don't drink and don't make your animals drink it. And I felt like if something like that would come to my mailbox, I would not even feel a scientist, I would feel a desperate citizen.
Yeah,
so
yeah, definitely.
So really, in a sense, the comics tell a story of like normal people that are confronted with such a silencing of information where even the person, so the protagonist is a person who is a young woman, completely careless of any environmental things. She also thinks that environmentalists are hippies and are like, she really don't like them. And then her cow dies. And she starts thinking like, what, why? And she discovered, so it's really a journey of discovery and shows how you don't need to be an environmentalist to care about it. It's really our survival.
Yeah, I love it. I'm looking forward to seeing this cartoon. Really, please let us know when you have it.
Of course. So it's going to be, let's say, in full printing at the end of the month. So we're really close. And I mean, when I plan to come in summer to the Netherlands, and I will definitely bring you some English version copies, because we are making it in Italian and English. So we have some English copies for...
Very cool. Awesome. Thank you so much. That's cool. Okay, well then let's go to an actual community, because I have an example for you of a case here in the Netherlands, which I am working with actually, and I would really like to put it to you and then see what you would advise them, both from your more policy making and governmental perspective back from your PhD, but also now with the knowledge you have from your new project. These people that I'm talking about, I'm working with them now for the last 2 years, and they are living here in the Netherlands, and they are part of a nature organization that is called the Nature and Birdwatch Organization Rotta. And they are having a project group, which they are calling POCO, which is short for Project Group Surface Water Quality Oostland. So Oostland is the area that they're looking at. And there's a river going through it, which is called the Rotte. This project group, they work towards a recovery and preservation of healthy and clean surface water. And in that way, they aim to add to the biodiversity in the area. So they have a particular aims, and the project group POCO, they joined the Drinkable River Citizen Science program. So that's also how I got to know them. And they're using the methodology that we created, but they went much further. So they invested in a serious equipment to measure the parameters of their interest, to really make sure that there's no discussion possible about the quality of the parameters. So what they did is they added also ecological monitoring, and now they are really, with a measurement plan, monitoring their area. What they are worried about in that area is that they can see that the water boards do not have the capacity to monitor the smaller water bodies of the Dutch polder systems. So like ditches, small canals. Yeah, and it's well known that these smaller water bodies do not all uphold the EU Water Framework Directive standards. On average, what the Netherlands needs to do is to provide data on the bigger water bodies. And those are already not always up to standards. But mostly that water comes from the smaller water bodies where, for example, pollution occurs due to greenhouse emissions, etc. But okay, so not all water bodies are actually happy to talk to this project group. They're not always enthusiastic about the help that is given by this project group, because they also feel as if they're being checked almost.
Right. Okay.
So there's a problem there, and then there's another one that is actually it relates to it. Is that there's a new measure to be put in practice by these two water boards that are working in this area. Is that they want to improve the water quality in several small lakes. One is called the Blijswijkse Zoom, and the other the Kralingse Plas. And the water boards are using a so-called phoslock to decrease the amount of phosphate in the water. Too much phosphate in summer often results in blue algae, and that's a big problem for swimming water areas. So it's of course something that is often noticed by people, and then the water board has to do something about it. So their solution now is to use phoslock. But it's a chemical mixture of which the long-term effects on the biodiversity are controversial, especially the effects on macroinvertebrates. But of course, those are animals that you on average don't see, and it's a long chain of biodiversity and ecological system that then slowly is affected. But they didn't convince the water boards for now, and one of those lakes they have already treated it with phoslock, and now they're trying again with the Kralingse Plas, and they have gotten an article published in one of the Rotterdam's opinion magazines. So this part is actually not being added by their measurements, because of course the effect afterwards they're going to measure that, I'm pretty sure, but this goes too fast, as you said already. These measures will then be already put in place, and then they can only show the effects, the consequences of the measure. It's an interesting case, in my opinion, and I'm very curious what you think they should do, at least for the general way of talking to these water boards, but perhaps also concerning this measure that they want to prevent.
Yeah, I mean, just as a clarification, the communities did run any analysis after this treatment?
So it has just happened. So I think the analysis is too soon now. You need I think you would need perhaps several months, maybe a year, to show the slow effect of what is happening.
Yeah, I mean, especially for this, I think one of the, at least, my first advice would be really to keep a diary of the situation before and over, and let's say in a sort of 6 months from now and 1 year from now, and really keep records of this. And even if the water board of the authority says we are doing that, kind of keep your own diary of that, because most of the time, one of the problems I have with communities that get to me is that they do have the evidence of the situation as fucked up later, but they really don't have the steps. Like, they are not documenting the steps, and they need to rely to access to information, access to documents, claims and filing requests for getting this, let's say, historical view. So one of the first thing I would say, really to document this transition with pictures, with qualitative evidence. Also, for example, do you see some strange smell, like feel some smell, or do you see something that is burning in your eyes, or do you see, I don't know, a dead body of any animal around the river? So really document it and keep a diary of, but also not so, let's say, kind of taking some let's say, points as reference. So, for example, going to the same point every Monday of the week, and then 2 days later, and so on. Because also taking this in a sort of systematic manner can also be useful further on.
Yeah, you really need to have a plan, definitely.
Yes, exactly. And also, I think sometimes it's very important that the authority itself knows that these people are kind of starting monitoring themselves, because I felt that many cases of like mismanagement were prevented by the sole fact that they felt these eyes watching over. And so the same place without any watchful citizen, and which, even if the same authority would feel kind of a pressure. So I think it's also this virtuous outcome of watching over. It's quite important. And I would say then, I mean, my broader advice that I gave after in the book, it's really integration, yes, but keeping some independence. Yeah. So in this case, for example, one, let's say, step ahead could be that one member of the community enters the water board as an kind of an advisor, like a spokesperson from the community. So from the inside, they can actually watch over the, let's say, as an insider, but without, let's say, without risking of losing their independence. So not without the buyout risk. So the risk that, for example, one of the members of the community becomes then more inclined to listen to the water board rather to the community interests.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, of course, if they have some pro bono lawyers, it's good to have them there. Also, because, I mean, sometimes, like, one of the, let's say, most powerful strategy that citizen scientists have is to manage to demonstrate violation of standards. So, for example, of the Water Framework Directive or any other standard from Dutch law, and the same violation becomes an argument. Yeah. And sometimes it's way more powerful, let's say, than just complaining vaguely.
Yeah.
Of course, this
exactly.
some like skills to manage to say that, but I'm pretty sure that any water expert or environmental lawyer over there could take this data and certainly assess the risk of violating, or also spotting like some other strategy that I'm seeing here around the Malpensa airport, where they're planning some expansion, is to spot some fragile biodiversity.
Yeah, of course.
And if you're talking to me about this intervention, like, I mean, I think there's definitely some, I don't know, amphibious or that could be struggling with this. So we really need a triangulation, I would say.
Yeah, exactly. So their tactic needs to be from different directions. And I am definitely going to share the podcast with them. So let's see what they think, and I will let you know what their response will be. But I'm pretty sure that they haven't yet considered the pro bono lawyer, for example. And it might be a very interesting thing, or to link with a university, indeed, a university student who needs a case. I don't know if you want to perhaps share any last insights, messages.
Yeah, well, my maybe a last message, and that would be more for listeners or like community listeners, is that sometimes I have the impression that environmental law and in general the law is perceived as something scary, troublesome. I mean, you go to a lawyer only if you're in trouble, and lawyers are generally bad people. Something I'm really trying to tell to people is that it doesn't require a super clever mind to read the law. So in a sense, we need to really dive into the law with communities and understand like what's written there, because many times the ultimate concept can be translated into very actionable points. And sometimes it's scary because you see all these words and all these pages of a constitution or a code, but I really feel that citizen scientists are not really exploiting the potential of the law. And one of my mission in making so creatively accessible, let's say, also law entailing legal findings, let's say, it's really to demonstrate that citizen scientists needs more lawyers and lawyers needs more citizen scientists to discuss. And I also maybe would like to have more lawyers in the field, because I think they consider still it's like a joke or something that is not serious. And recently I felt that, well, especially in the US, this is really taken more serious. But in Europe, I really have the impression that lawyers are like skeptical. This is something that is a background thing. And I mean, I'm expecting in the next like 5 years, things to change radically. So I really look forward to this change.
Okay, no, I think that's a really good final message. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the Science Citizens podcast. I would love to hear what you thought about it, so don't hesitate to send me an email, tweet, or other type of message. Also, if you have any interesting topics I should cover in this podcast, let me know. In the meantime, keep thinking, stay interested, be a science citizen.